And another thing that I know has been top of mind is the topic of our next talk. Rich, tell us a little more about that.
Oh, AI. We finally get to dive into the topic of AI. AI has been a big one. Let's see, ChatGPT went public. What was it? October, November of 21, I think. And it pretty much for something that's been around since like the 70s, what, what, you would have thought that it was just this most magnificent creation. And I think it was just the bringing it to the public eye that just sparked like one of the biggest technology wildfires I think I've seen in a while. And people can say what they want, how they feel about AI. But I think what we have coming up now, we have two of, I would say, some of the smartest individuals I think I've ever had the privilege of ever speaking with Rob Lee and James Lyne, talking about using AI in medical diagnostics. And I think when we look at AI, that's one of the things I think we should be like, everybody focuses on the negative of AI. This is one of those ones where, hey, like this really has a great potential to be something phenomenal.
I agree. Let's leave AI to things like this that can help us, in a widespread impact that can help us, make technological advancements in healthcare. Let's leave AI to things like that. And we're going to hear a little bit more from Rob and James on that topic.
Absolutely. It's going to be a great one.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rob Lee, and I'm the Chief of Research here at the SANS Institute. And really happy to be on the Healthcare Forum with my really good friend, James Lyne, who is the Chief Innovation Officer and Chief Technology Officer of the SANS Institute. James?
Hey everyone, a pleasure to be here today. And we're talking about risks in healthcare and, of course, some of the advantages that are present, some of these wonderful new technologies like AI. But Rob, to get moving really quickly here, um, I find it a little bit difficult to gel these highly fast moving progressive technologies like AI, which can be prone to a little sloppiness and the odd hallucination with an environment like healthcare, where there's life and limb impact and high risk. Like that seems like a bit of a water and oil scenario. And I know with water and oil, if you mix it hard enough, it works. But tell me a little bit about how you think about this, or even some of the stories you might have about early adoption, both good, bad, and ugly. What's going on
Yeah,
out there?
I'm curious the same thing in reverse for you as well. But a couple stories that I didn't even realize that how much AI is actually already prevalent in use in medical technologies. Specifically, I went through several different MRIs this past year, and the doctors were telling me that the imaging is actually going through an AI overlay that is helping the doctors pinpoint areas that might be, suspect or they should be able to pay a little bit more attention to. And that got me thinking a little bit more about like, well, what other technologies are potentially, being used on the medical device and medical fields. And one of the things that I ran into and just in my own personal research and longevity and all these other things that kind of fascinate me from, personal reasons behind the scenes is that from a research perspective on the genome, being able to have patients be able to do their own examinations of their own health records, potentially using AI to say, hey, listen, I've had 3 different specialists have their outputs in my own record. Can you correlate between these 3 and potentially highlight anything that would be of concern? So not only is it enabling doctors, it is enabling patients to take a little bit more control of their own personal health care. So for me personally on the MRI, nothing was found, but at the same time, it kind of gave me a little bit of peace of mind that it was not only an AI, but also the specialist, the radiologist who was looking at this, using traditional techniques in addition to getting additional information through the AI overlay that they're utilizing for it. What about you? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, look, I love your example because it is combining the power of AI and associated, machine learning techniques that unlocks with, the traditional trust model of a physician's oversight. And I think that's going to be one of the probably most popular use cases early on. We've seen studies popping up where AI does a phenomenal job of detecting skin cancer from images with a high rate of accuracy, in some cases beating the capabilities of physicians. We've also seen trials, where AI attempts to put together treatment plans for patients with cancer or interact with patients and answer questions. and the hallucinations can be quite severe. I classify a lot of those studies as wildly impressive, but not quite ready for prime time, considering, some of the potential ramifications of a treatment plan that doesn't align to the kind of US national, cancer guidelines. But this whole using it as a tool with oversight, I think is probably going to be popular for a while. It kind of, Rob, reminds me of the kind of IBM, paper back from kind of 1970. No machine should be a manager because no manager can be held accountable. And in medicine, when dealing with patients and life and limb impact, that really applies. AI doesn't really care necessarily if it's right. The other interesting thing I keep kind of running into when I read these studies is just the difficulty of loading with good and unbiased data. The inadvertent skewing of demographic data, like being better at, picking up certain ethnicity skin cancer versus others because of the database that was used or the kind of images that were available. That brings some really fascinating ethical, but also logistic, challenges to the fore in the application of AI in medicine. But before we kind of get into the future prospect here a little bit, Robert, I wonder how you think about the just raw cybersecurity and privacy ramifications of this. If I draw a parallel to the rest of the world, we've seen a lot of shadow IT implementations of AI, right? People just spinning it up and using it for their day jobs. Do you think we're seeing as much of that in healthcare? Is, patient data kind of leaking out into places it shouldn't? Or are you seeing more folks kind of leaning back and going, oh, I'm going to wait until that's more formally adopted? I'll give you the process. I'm seeing the second one more than the first, but I'm interested in what you've observed.
I definitely, in my own experience watching the providers, they specifically are entirely concerned about the privacy related issues, and especially considering, their patient data, how it's potentially used, and making sure it's, under the HIPAA requirements, at least here in the United States. In other instances, this is where I think we're going to start seeing a pivot, is that patients themselves deciding what they want to do with their own data and potentially uploading it to uncontrolled data sources. Or, for example, if you map your genome and, which is a 100 gigabyte file, if you can map the entire thing, and then you decide to upload that to an analytical site that you decide, I'm putting my patient data in there. Well, that site may not be in the United States. It may not be, under the same kind of control and security precautions. So where I start to lean in a little bit more is less on the provider side, but more on do the patients understand that the more control and the more data that they have of themselves and the more opportunity that they could do their own self-diagnostics, that those entities and those organizations that are potentially offering these may try to, sit outside, country boundaries or in the EMEA, just to be able to make sure that they can do as much as they want with it in order to provide as many diagnostics as possible without having to have the privacy concerns. A good example, of this policy constriction is what's going on with Apple Intelligence right now. Not going to rabbit hole us, but it's going to be available in the United States, but in EMEA, it's not going to be available because of the AI regulations that are already existing in the EMEA at this point. So when we start taking a look at what's going on in Europe versus other locations, my concern is more what patients are going to do with their own data, and do the patients understand where they're uploading this data is potentially secure or not secure?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And look, we've struggled with these types of issues before. I mean, Rob, look at all the difficulty that, folks in healthcare and like a broader medical domain have had with supply chain and devices provided by vendors with poor patching strategies, with difficult to manage restrictions. It's sadly frequent to walk into a hospital and see something running something egregious like Windows 2000. My personal record is it was only fairly recently I saw a device running Windows 95, which is very offensive. And, and I sympathize. I talk to CISOs a lot who are working really hard to bring modern security practices to an environment where there's a lot of vendors complex data flows, high risk data, intense regulations, and even personal culpability on the data they're protecting. And that's difficult, even with these IoT-esque devices that they have to manage in the environment. Now, AI is a lot more elastic. And already we're seeing a lot of vendors bringing these technologies in. I suspect in some cases, them turning up in hospitals without people even necessarily recognizing that it's happened. So it kind of feels like a step change again of a risk that was already hard to manage in this environment. But I guess we have more awareness than we've traditionally had on this
I mean,
stuff. We do have some better regulations, right?
I might disagree on the awareness, especially on the patient side. I'm kind of curious as
That's
to your
true.
thoughts on that. Do the patients realize that as everything is going electronic and they're able to download, their massive like raw data feeds, what they could potentially do with that is like they're assuming it's protected everywhere. But what's your thoughts on the patient side of that?
I think you're right, actually. I think there probably is less awareness. And I think for many, an assumption that, a hospital or a medical environment, a place that, has life and limb ramifications, of course, is running the latest technology, safeguards, is carefully considering all of this stuff. They may be horrified to learn of the existence of Windows 95 and Windows 2000 devices that are on admittedly isolated networks. And I think for many, understanding what it means to say that your data was run through machine learning implementation or through AI technologies, that's actually still quite abstract for most people in society to process and understand, whether that's good, bad, neutral, or otherwise. So I think there is quite a lag of understanding there for the, general members of the public.
Well, do you think that's primarily due to the fact that there's a general lack of understanding of what generative AI and machine learning can do on their daily lives, in addition to what's going on the medical side?
Oh, I think that's absolutely it. And look, even in more technical, parts of society, certainly, Rob, I think even in our industry, understanding what is behind the single label of AI and the different types of technologies, the different types of capabilities, the different limitations, I would say that's something a lot of people haven't necessarily got their heads around yet. We take that, I think, for granted as folks that have been playing with this stuff a lot. But even a lot of cybersecurity teams, they're running at 105%. Right? I never run into a cybersecurity team that's like, oh yeah, we have plenty of time for research. They're always
Right.
like, oh, there's another event. Oh, is it an incident? We need to do something. Oh, like it's always busy. So they're not getting necessarily the time to understand the technology behind those labels, let alone kind of broader society. Um,
Well,
so no, that's a gap.
take for example, what Apple Intelligence is coming out with. They have the iPhone 16. They're obviously it's not released yet, so no one's really had this ability to do this. But the ability to take pictures of an item and have it automatically have an AI look at that. I mean, the implications of this on the medical side is, imagine what was I just bitten by, and they take a picture of their bite, or what rash is this? This self-diagnostic is, kind of what I think a lot of people initially get exposed to as, is this serious or not? And then, should I see a doctor? You could see those websites, start popping up more and more frequently. The implications of AI on a daily use perspective, just being able to take a picture of a restaurant and saying, hey, is this a good restaurant? What are the reviews on it? That's what, some of the Apple Intelligence and, that is going to be in the palm of our hands. But if you take that into self-diagnostic world as to like the amount of times is my toe broken? If they take a picture of it, you know, that you could immediately see how that would potentially be of use for a lot of people. But the
Yes, it
protection of
says,
that data,
no, your toe is just ugly.
yeah, it just, well, it's a bunion, I have a bunion problem. But even the implications of, taking it one step further, I'm kind of curious as to your thoughts as to like, what are the long-term future implications of some AI technologies? One that is, I heard on a podcast by Peter T. The Drive that it was a mind-melting moment when I ended up thinking about it, is mental health. Is that with AI, you could have your own mental health professional that is completely secure and will remember every single conversation that you had in the past, and it would be potentially your AI therapist. Now, before everyone immediately rejects that thought here for a second, but imagine if you are able to have a private conversation with a qualified mental health therapy that opens up the door for what the stigma is considered. A lot of people have like, "Oh, I don't want to be seen as I'm in therapy." The imagine the potential help, but also what the potential risks are for that. And that's why it's mind melting for me for that alone is what is the implication, just like, just of that consideration of because we're talking about medical, but it also expands into the, what could that mean if you have an AI therapist? And that's something else that I'm just like, I stop and I'm like, whoa, for like, a reuse moment there.
But I think, Rob, to your point here, so we have an environment that tends to be risk adverse. And I'm happy about that because it's an environment that impacts life and limb. So risk averse is good. I would not want the average hospital to behave like the average tech startup.
Right.
So big thanks to our CISOs and healthcare organizations for being a little more conservative. And, you could say, hey, that's a positive from a risk perspective. It's a correct attitude. But of course, these are also organizations that are people organizations. They're not technology or, device organizations. They're not generating, in most instances, their money from kind of IP calculation and software, but people. So there is this kind of worry of, hey, will folk lean back from these types of technologies too much, given some of the benefits that are being described? And I think as you were saying that, I was thinking about the whole range of possibilities for this technology, the already proven utility in diagnostics as an additive tool, looking at those use cases in cancer, for example. I was thinking about your example with therapy, thinking about the quick help and advice. So much of healthcare is about dealing with volume and this obsession with increasing efficiency to increase quality of how patients are treated. I actually don't worry that adoption will occur because I think there's so many insane benefits here that align to the problems in healthcare. That there are places where AI is just interesting. I think you and I could reel off 10 that are game changing for healthcare. And even if they're not quite ready today, with how the stuff's improving with better data, kind of loads, with better data feeds in the first place, I just feel like we're talking about the inevitable. Like AI is going to have a hugely disruptive effect on healthcare, a place that is typically technology risk averse. It's coming. It's inevitable.
The institutions themselves will tend to, a lot of the like the larger scale institutions will probably be the more resistant initially. Then you will have the medical startups that do exist out there. Another one I just went through is, I believe it's the Gallery test. It's a new blood test that detects 90% of all the cancers. The thing about it is it's not specifically insurable yet, because they haven't gotten to the point where to say, hey, it's covered by insurance. But from a diagnostic perspective and its false positive rate, it definitely is, we have this startup that's out there that's pushing the institutions, the insurance institutions and the healthcare institutions saying, hey, this test has its wide potential impact at early cancer screening. Yet it's still, there's this resistance to it from even the insurance side, say, we're not covering it just yet because of X, Y, and Z as a result of that. And you're going to start seeing the same thing occur in the medical side, where you're going to have essentially medical startups, still compliant in the different regions, trying to say, hey, listen, we're going to do early diagnostics. We're going to do early screenings. We're going to try and make sure you're in control of your healthcare. And I think AI is that multiple factor that's going to be specifically enabling a lot of these doctors and healthcare professionals in order to allow that to occur. But again, it's going to be disruptive, but you're going to see a lot of startups, probably starting to fail, trying to say, hey, we have a diagnostic, that is, AI based, that is doing something that no one's seen before. Whether the institutions adopt that quick enough, though, is really what I think one of your key points are.
Well, I guess, look, there's research institutions that have jumped on these technologies, right? We're both referencing studies that are happening now. there's a whole vendor ecosystem where they're looking at opportunities to integrate AI as well. And if the use cases are compelling, like we think, and improving, it's a matter of time. It's going to happen. These things are going to turn up in these environments and probably already are. So Rob, I'm curious how you think about this. And I'll ask you to pad for time whilst I think what my answer would be. The standard strategy, right? So if it's inevitable, these things are going to turn up in, various kind of technology platforms from vendors, in research projects, the wave is coming. What are the things that security leaders in these organizations or security practitioners in the medical domain, the broadest extent, should think about now? Like, how can we prepare and get ourselves ready, whether it's policy, awareness, technology, I don't know, network structure? Like, what are the things you would do with the assumption this wave, this tsunami of useful AI is coming in the next few years in the medical domain?
And that's a great question. I think it goes back to a lot of the basics, whether we're talking about the cloud or whether we're talking about utilization of AI, where your data is stored and what you're doing with that data needs to be explicitly defined by either the startups or the existing institutions. When you have your medical records online and you're signing all the policy and compliance documents and saying, okay, I'm now accessing my medical records online, they force two-factor authentication. In most cases, I've seen very few that don't do two-factor on. But the accessibility to your own data, the ability to download it, to be able to own it yourself and to take responsibility for it, I think is crucial. So you have the personal responsibility. And I think there's some security awareness and education that needs to occur on the personal side as to once you publicize this, once you let it get out, that may be on you. Then you are dealing with the startups that likely should lead, these AI startups on the medical side or the diagnostic side, or potentially the, hey, we're selling a new capability. For example, AI and mental health, if that becomes a thing, they need to lead with how they're potentially securing an individual's privacy and data so it doesn't leak, and how is it in a private cloud, and this is something that you're seeing a corollary to currently on people questioning Apple's intelligence and how it's potentially storing its data in your private cloud that's associated with your iPhone. For example, it's the same criteria. And again, it's whether or not the organizations lead with that as a part of its, main core message is that we understand how important diagnostics are. We also understand how important privacy is. As a result, here's what we do. And it needs to really be open and dynamic in their answers about how they're potentially approaching them. So right back to you, like anything else you would add to that?
I think that's a really good list, honestly. And look, this is difficult because we're trying to address research organizations, kind of medical researchers, technology developers in healthcare, people who run institutions that are patient facing. And I probably have a bit of different advice for each of those groups. In the research category, I probably have more nudges on the consideration of ethics and thinking about data biases you may casually be introducing inadvertently. But if I shift back a little towards these kind of other institutions that are patient facing, hospitals and others, I think you have to start with a solid foundation of thinking about supply chain risk and how you're going to evaluate this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because vendors are already building this stuff in. Now, in some cases, it's now with AI, and it's marketing. It's not doing anything you need to worry about. In other instances, there is some rapid deployment of this stuff, making sure you've got a resilient process to know what these platforms are, these technologies, what, AI may be there, where that data is going to validate it, I think is important. As you've highlighted, Rob, there is going to be this, hey, where's that data go to do that processing question? And there's a lot more regulation than there's ever been, but there are going to be cowboy moments. So, if I'm a CISO waiting for this tsunami, looking at that supply chain process, having an AI specific section that at least manifests what you've got going on in your environment, I think is something I'd really closely be looking at.
Let me ask you a different spin on another
Please.
question regarding this. So everyone is talking about AI in the sense that, is AI going to replace my job? But how do you think it's going to impact the medical profession? Is AI going to replace a bunch of doctors and radiologists, or what's your take on that? From your perspectives, because that's when people hear AI, and it's almost like immediate. Hey, am I about to lose my job? Apparently, what's your thoughts?
I think that medical practitioners will be even more in need when you consider the imminent launch of Skynet that AI will multiply for. Terminators are coming. We're going to need you a lot. Hey, look, that's a great question. And look, I don't know. Like, no one truly has a crystal ball on this stuff. There have been some really interesting studies. There was a HBR paper on it. It was pretty good, that tries to categorize different roles into different buckets of kind of different levels of risk or opportunity for AI. And the macro of the study is it's absolutely not without risk. The notion that AI will have no impact on the workplace and will never cause a role to be eliminated or substantially changed. Yeah, like it is going to cause that. I think here is a place where the healthcare challenges are growing. The scale, providing quality at scale, the kind of balance of new technologies and research domains, they're only increasing. You rarely hear from a healthcare organization in extant, oh, we have so much capacity, that person has nothing to do. Usually the opposite. So for me, I think it's going to be an enabling tool, and it will change roles and processes, but I think it will minimally eliminate them. It'll change them. And I particularly cling on to this IBM kind of 1970s paper. I repeat once more that I think really matters. No machine should be a manager, because no machine can be held accountable, right? You can't sue an AI for the fact that, it kind of did a bad diagnosis job on your ugly toe or your bunion that turned out to be a life-threatening toe disorder.
I like the fact that you just brought up that paper, because I know the author, and I actually quote that paper quite frequently, because it's the first time. It's Alvin Toffler, but he coined the term information overload as well. Just such a kind of a nerd thing to like reference on the call.
I'm doing it like so early on, right? So like that's foresight, but it's so appropriate to where we are now. Like, I love AI. I think it's incredible. I think we should use it aggressively. I see huge potential in the medical domain. But when it comes down to an analysis of, looking at some of my healthcare data, I want AI to get used. It appears to have wonderful accuracy and give me results quicker. And I want that. I don't want to wait, but I want a qualified human to validate it.
And I think that's the key, what you just stated there, is that, I don't think anyone's worried about potentially, or shouldn't be worried about, losing their jobs, but the augmentation of AI toward every specialist that's out there, I think is going to be enormous. Radiology is a really good example. Even surgeries, when you end up thinking about, like, if you have autonomous robotic surgeries using AI, and all of a sudden your mind melts on that concept too. But, we're within, the possibilities of this stuff being able to change not only what's going on here in, first world locations, but what happens worldwide in terms of the access to potential medical care that is augmented with AI, that is, you're able to potentially scale up, much more quickly. So I'm a true believer. It goes back into, and you hear this all the time when you're talking about AI, is AI enabled humans will replace non-AI enabled humans. So it's within everyone's effort to pay attention to what's going on in AI. It doesn't mean you have to directly tomorrow go out and adopt it, but you should be, obviously aware of it and starting to really be looking at learning it as much as you can. And despite your practice in medical, whether you're in cybersecurity, whether you're a lawyer, I think the implications across the board here are pretty paramount.
I agree. Well stated. And I think, look, even cybersecurity practitioners in healthcare, the same applies. Right? AI, I think, will augment forensics and threat detection and incident response and all these things massively, but I don't believe it, fundamentally kind of removes the need for those practitioners. Hey, Rob, I know we're near the end here, so this will be fun. I'm gonna bully us again near the very end here, and brief wrap up, 30 seconds each ish, an elevator pitch, if you will. One takeaway from this for folks in their consideration of AI or getting ready, or just one thing you're incredibly excited about? You get to pick, you get to go first. I hope you don't pick the one I've got in my head.
You're always going, yeah, I have to go first all the time. All right.
That's
So
the rules.
here we go. 30 seconds. I truly believe that AI, especially in the cybersecurity side, when it comes to medical, is the biggest risk is going to be the personal data that you're going to have access to, your raw data from your electronic records, and the ability to utilize those in different startups or medical diagnostics that are going to exist out there. And I believe that there's going to be a certain amount of security awareness that each individual needs to take responsibility for their own personal data, very similar to your own tax records or financial statements. All of that really sensitive data, you now have access to potentially your entire DNA mapped out, and potentially that getting out or that being leaked has some severe potential consequences for the individual. So I go back to, despite everything we talked about from the providers who I truly believe have the best interests of the patients at heart, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, they're doing their darndest and their best to protect patient data. But it comes down to what the individuals are going to do with this data now that they have access to these new technologies that are AI based. All right. Now I want to hear yours.
That was my one. All right. So for me, look, amazing branch of technologies with incredible use cases. I believe we should be progressive in their adoption application. I'm excited to see research occurring all across medicine, exploring how this can be used for good. I think there are some pretty consequential challenges in ethics, in, biases of data, and in fundamental kind of security and privacy that flows a little in the opposite direction of how, healthcare organizations normally manage risk. So for me, if I'm a security leader, a CISO, the temptation maybe to lean back and wait for this to mature more, for these studies to complete, these technologies to come to fruition. Don't. Doesn't mean you need to adopt them immediately, but it's happening now. There is likely this stuff in your environment already. Vendors are building it in. It's turning up in platforms. I would start to proactively build the processes to track this stuff, to map it, to have policies for it. Get practice. Because when the tsunami hits, you don't want to be learning to deal with these types of questions in your supply chain evaluation when there's tons of them. Start now, even if your adoption is a relatively conservative approach overall. It's coming.
That's a really good point. So I think we're going to go ahead and say thank you for attending our little fireside chat between James and I. My name's Rob Lyne.
Actual fire, by the way.
There's no actual fire. Yeah, we have some Legos behind it, but Lego chat. But I really appreciate everyone signing on today. My name's Rob Lee. I'm the Chief of Research with the SANS Institute. Thank you for attending. James?
Absolute pleasure. Great to be here. And I hope you got some things from this you can apply. And I'm looking forward to talking about all the exciting things that everyone has done with AI and reviewing the stuff. We'll probably be having this conversation again pretty soon, Rob. This stuff is moving quickly. So
Pretty sure.
until next time.
Thanks, everyone.
It's so crazy. I just want to put it out there really quick. I'm saying it. James isn't here to defend himself. I think I can lift more than James. He can challenge me at any event he wants to, but I'm calling it out.
Sorry, James, but Team Rich, that's Team Rich.